Opposing Gloves here, and this is the second video in the rhythm series. Today we're going to be looking at what is rhythm and how do we make it interesting. So this sort of a little more philosophical, but rhythm essentially is a phenomenon we put in the universe. Rhythm really isn't there. We decide that there's some sort of timing about this, and we make sense of it. There are actually people who are rhythm blind. I talk about it in my critical listening series. People who literally can sing the correct pitch, but they cannot do a rhythm. They are literally incapable of understanding rhythm because their brain doesn't have the processes necessary to compare what they're hearing against a meter or a sense of time. Usually they have problems with their cerebellum because that's where timing goes on. So it's kind of an interesting deal. How do we make interesting rhythms? And this means it's a very subjective thing. Now, if we're going to talk about rhythm in more of a set ironclad stance, that basically means rhythm is some sort of meter you derive, and then you emphasize different parts of time consistently through the use of what's called a meter. And by manipulating this meter and shifting expectations around in this meter, you can make things sound interesting. And it's called syncopation and other things. We're going to break all this down as we go later and later on. But in a nutshell, that is what rhythm is meant to do. And we know that it's very subjective. So as we get into this, I have a little example here of something that I think is a pretty interesting rhythm. So this is a track I wrote a while ago. It's called Don't Look Inside. And I'm going to play for you the very, very last couple bars. I decided to do something interesting as an outro for my track. And so here it is. And I think it's quite an interesting rhythm. So it's sort of an interesting deal, and we see there's a lot going on, and a lot of people tend to think of rhythm as just the drum part or the percussive part, and that's so false. We see that this moment right here is largely manipulated by the way the chord comes in. And we have this little upbeat thing going on, and it allows us to get this sense of feeling, this sense of space where things should go. And so by creating these interesting rhythms, we maintain interest in a track, but at the same time, you don't want your rhythm to be like, if I were to put this in the middle of the drop, it'd probably be a little too much because I have all these other things that are giving and cueing the listener to a sense of rhythm. And what I'm doing is I'm augmenting the way you make something sound interesting is you give them something to expect, and then you give it to them at first. Sometimes you don't. Maybe you don't give it to them at first, but you do something. You give it to them or you don't give it to them. Then the next thing you do is you augment whatever you did. So if you didn't give it to them, now you give it to them. If you did give it to them, now you don't give it to them. Or you manipulate it a little bit, and then you give it to them a little bit more, and then you take it away some. And then you're manipulating all these expectations. So when a listener is listening, they're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to expect. Because listening to music is a very in the present circumstance. So you are listening and you're trying to guess. And even if you've heard the song before, it's still compelling enough. You'd be surprised how your brain is on fire when it's listening to music. And it's going, what did I just hear? What were the pitches? What were the timbres? What was the timing? La, la, la. And then it's trying to say, this is what I'm hearing now. And then it's trying to guess what's coming next. And then that's where you, as a songwriter, a composer, a producer, that's your job to make that happen in a way that makes them keep guessing, like, oh, what's next, and so this is a pretty wild thing. Now I'm using a couple different techniques, but the basic core of it is I have basically two drum patterns I created. One of them is this, and then the other one is this. And you see that I have this, I augment, this is a syncopated rhythm, but that is okay. That's the vibe of the track I was going for. And then I have this drum loop. And what I do is I send it through an amplitude modulating plugin. Well, not modulating, it turns volume on and off. And it also does some interesting time things. And I'm not modulating, I am automating the parameter here. Don't worry if you don't understand this part. I'm just telling you what I did for you people who do know. And that is creating this. It's creating those whooshes and whap sounds. and I set that by ear. So this wasn't like a super like, oh, I'm going to make this crazy sounding rhythm right here. But if we get into breakcore, if you go check out my drum and bass series where I make a breakcore track, I do all this micro editing and I make this freaking crazy rhythm. Like there's just syncopation and weird stuff happening all over the map. That is the way breakcore sounds, a very interesting rhythm. So rhythm also, as far as interesting go, falls into the category of what kind of a track are you writing? What are the rhythms typical to that track? And if you want to write rhythms that fall into a specific genre intuitively, you need to listen to that genre. It needs to be in your head already. And your brain is this incredible computer that can take everything you've heard and it can begin to put things in new orders. So that's where you are producing. You're being creative at that point. So writing interesting rhythms, I guess in a nutshell, is just creating an augmentation of what is expected, but in a way that is not obtrusive. If you do something that listeners would never expect, then they're going to say that sounds wrong. And that's the whole subjective thing. At what point do you cross that line? Some of that stuff, like breakcore, definitely attempts to cross that line. And if you do it, it's okay. Like in that genre, it's expected. It's like exciting. And because you have this outrageous expectation, if you've never heard of breakcore, go look it up. Ruby, my dear, and is a good artist, or Igor spelled with 3 R's on the end, is also another fantabulous artist. Fantabulous. And so that's basically interesting rhythm. And so whatever the listeners expect when they listen to your track will basically dictate the subjective qualities you kind of want to stay within. So those subjective limits, of course, can be broken if you're a visionary. So if you're someone who is going to try and mix genres and stuff, the way you do it, and there's going to be a certain expectation about whatever it is they're listening. But if they're listening to something they don't have expectations, but they're trying to mix expectations they had before, that's when you are going to be like a successful remixer if you're going to try and cross genres or do something really unusual with a piece of audio. So that's interesting rhythms in a nutshell. Now, I know we didn't go over too many technical things, but that's because we need to have a really clear understanding of why, or of what makes a rhythm interesting, what allows us to maintain interest and have interest. All right, before we're done with this, let's analyze this drum loop. Let's see how we can augment rhythm. So typically in a song like this, we're in a meter that goes doonch, 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 and we're emphasizing these upbeats. So we have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2. And I encourage that by the use of my snare. So if I were to just play the first part of this, and you see it's 1 and 2, and that you would expect that to continue. Like that will fall into the rhythm of what we're going for, right? That'll fall into a type of meter that's very easily repeatable. However, what I do is I augment the expectation of how this should continue by putting in this little roll here with the bass drum, do 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 do, and it's even stranger that it's sort of in the bass drum. And I also have it getting louder as we go, so it's creating another type of rhythm, an amplitude type rhythm. And we're going to talk about different kinds of rhythm, because you could be doing this with harmony, you could be doing this with one note but changing the amplitude, or you could just be hitting the same note repeatedly at the same volume. It depends on where you want your attention to be shifted to. But if I play the whole beat, oh, that sounds weird. Let me just do it like that. There we go. I don't know. I have a filter automation on that I turned on somewhere I wasn't aware of. But anyways, you hear that do 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 do. And then I go back because I'm emphasizing my rhythm in other ways over here. Oh, well, in this case, it stays the same. But before I had this do 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 do, and then this will enhance that 1 and 2 and 1. But when those backbeats hit, that's like, oh, I didn't expect that. It makes it more interesting. And then, of course, we toss in our next element of rhythm, which is that crazy thing I showed you earlier. So that's basically all I'm doing is I'm manipulating that, and I'm doing it in very creative ways. And then we add in our harmonics, our harmonics, our other sounds, and we get our sense of melody going as well. And you see things line up, doon, doon, doon. So we have these outlined beats, but then there's these superimposed beats. There's like multiple levels, and introducing these into composition is quite an art form, because you want it to all jive together. And because if I were to move something off just a little bit, it would sound really messed up. Like if we move this over like that. It just sounds your sense of rhythm. Now, we've listened to this to sort of analyze it, so it's kind of our subjective qualities have changed, which is one reason why listening to music repeatedly can be a little challenging. But it's not hard to tell that that sounds wrong. If we were listening down the first try, we'd be like, something sounds off there. It's not within our subjective range to say that sounds pleasing or acceptable, unless you're listening to like some really experimental type music where that is the expectation. But here, that is not the expectation, and so it does not sound correct. So that's that. I hope you found this video useful. Subscribe, support me on Patreon, and have a blessed day.
Watch out! Watch out!